They were only 18, with nothing but each other and a future no one believed in. Homeless, overlooked, and judged before they could even speak. The world had already decided how their story would end. When they bought a crumbling farmhouse for just $10, people didn't see courage. They saw failure waiting to happen. But what began as survival quickly turned into something far more powerful, because what those two sisters built wasn't just a home. It was a quiet rebellion against everything stacked against them. So how did two girls with nothing manage to shock an entire community that never gave them a chance? Before everything fell apart, their world was already fragile. The twin sisters had grown up moving from place to place, never staying long enough to call anywhere home. Stability was something they had only seen in other people's lives, never their own. By the time they turned 18, the system meant to protect them quietly stepped away, leaving them with nothing but a few belongings and each other. They learned quickly how people saw them, not as young girls trying to survive, but as trouble waiting to happen. Landlords turned them away without explanation. Store owners watched them a little too closely. Even when they stayed silent, the judgment followed them, heavy and constant. Nights became colder, longer. Some were spent under dim streetlights. Others in places no one would ever choose if they had a choice. Still, they held on to one idea, that somehow they could build something better. Then came the farmhouse. Abandoned, broken, unwanted, just like how the world saw them. No one expected them to take it. And even fewer believed they could survive what came next. At first, it felt like they were rebuilding more than just a house. They were rebuilding themselves. The farmhouse stood on the edge of town, its broken windows staring out like hollow eyes, its walls weathered by years of neglect. Every step inside it felt uncertain, like the place itself was testing whether they truly belonged there. They worked from sunrise to nightfall, clearing debris, patching holes, and trying to make something livable out of what everyone else had abandoned. But it didn't take long for the attention to start. It began with stairs, cars slowing down on the dirt road, people whispering from a distance. Then came the visits, neighbors who didn't come to welcome them, but to question them. Their presence wasn't seen as brave or determined. It was seen as suspicious. Soon the tone shifted. Authorities started showing up without warning, inspections that no one else in the area seemed to face, questions that felt less about rules and more about doubt that they had the right to be there at all. Every small mistake was magnified, every effort dismissed. It wasn't about the house anymore. It was about them. Even when they stayed quiet, kept their heads down, and followed every instruction, the pressure only grew. Supplies they ordered went missing. Tools were tampered with. Once after hours of work, they returned to find part of what they had repaired. Destroyed overnight. No explanation, no accountability. And yet they kept going, because leaving would mean proving everyone right. But the deeper they pushed forward, the harder the resistance became. One evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the land, something changed. The usual silence of the property felt different, heavy, like it was holding its breath. That night would become the moment everything escalated, because what they were about to face wasn't just doubt or judgment anymore. It was something far more deliberate and far more dangerous. That night, the silence didn't last. It shattered. A sudden crash echoed through the farmhouse, sharp and violent, sending dust falling from the ceiling. The sisters froze, their hearts pounding as another sound followed, closer this time. Heavy footsteps outside, not one, but several. They didn't need to see to understand. This wasn't random. The walls they had worked so hard to rebuild suddenly felt fragile, exposed. Every shadow stretched longer, every creak louder. The air was thick with something unspoken, something dangerous. Then came the breaking point. Glass exploded inward, scattering across the floor. The outside darkness pushed its way in, carrying with it the weight of anger, of resentment that had been building for days, maybe longer. The kind of anger that doesn't ask questions. It only destroys. In that moment, everything they had built, everything they had fought for, hung by a thread. Fear rushed in, fast and overwhelming. But beneath it, something else began to rise. Not weakness, not surrender. Defiance, because leaving now would mean accepting the role the world had written for them. It would mean walking away from the only thing they had ever tried to claim as their own. The noise outside grew louder, more aggressive. The pressure closing in from every side. And still, They didn't run. They stood there in the middle of a broken house that no one believed they deserved, refusing to disappear. Because this was no longer just about survival. It was about being seen. And as the chaos reached its peak, one truth became impossible to ignore. This moment would either destroy them or force the world to finally face what it had been trying to ignore all along. By morning, the farmhouse looked worse than it ever had before. Broken glass covered the floors they had just cleaned. Parts of the walls they had repaired were torn open again. The place they had fought so hard to rebuild now stood, as a reminder of how quickly everything could be taken from them. But they were still there, shaken, exhausted, and fully aware of what had been done, but still standing. What followed was not immediate justice. There were no quick apologies, no sudden change of heart from the people who had doubted them. Instead, there was silence. The kind of silence that tries to bury what happened, to make it seem smaller than it was. But this time, they didn't stay invisible. Piece by piece, they began rebuilding again. Not just the farmhouse, but their presence. Their right to exist in a space that had tried to reject them. And slowly, something shifted. Not everywhere, not for everyone, but enough to be noticed. Enough to make people look twice, question what they thought they knew. Because their story refused to disappear. What happened to them wasn't just about a broken house. It was about being seen as less before they were ever given a chance. It was about how quickly judgment can turn into harm, and how often that harm is ignored. Yet despite everything, they didn't leave. They stayed. They built. They proved that resilience can speak louder than hate, but also that it shouldn't have to. And that leaves a question that's harder to ignore than the damage ever was. How many more have to fight this hard, just to be allowed to belong?